All right. Let me offer you, first of all, some Bellamore so we have the conversation. Yep. Oops. You see, that's getting old.
Do not waste state resources.
Exactly.
You're gonna
All
have
right. No, not that bad. Let me go. Put it down. There's a kind of. All right, Ralph. If you can just tell me about your impression.
Yeah. Hold on a minute. One out.
So if you can just tell me about your impression, what you're doing.
Well, I represent a Soviet soldier of the Second World War, Great Patriotic War, from 1943 to 1945.
All right. So, of that all possible things that you can do on a reenactment. I mean, why you choose the Soviet Union?
There's a little bit of a story to that. This goes back to high school. My senior year in English class, I had to do a comparative paper. I had to pick two topics and compare and contrast them. So I decided to do the space race, so the Soviet space program versus the American space program. And when I started to do my research, I went to the school library and I found lots of information on the American program, but very little on the Soviet. And I had to go to outside sources like public libraries, internet sources, that kind of thing. And everything that was in the school library. Now remember, I was in high school from 2000 to 2004, so a lot of my books and materials are still left over from the Cold War. So while they're not outright lies, there's a lot of disinformation. So they had a lot of really good books on stuff like the Apollo and the Gemini programs, like the big American successes, but very little about American failures and even less about the Soviet program. So when I started to look at outside sources, I found out that the Soviets were really winning the space race for the first few years or so. Everything that, all of the initial steps into space were all Soviet achievements, like first satellite, first manned orbit of the Earth, first spacewalk, first space station, first probes to Venus, the Moon, Mars, all Soviet achievements. And I thought, well, wow, this is very dishonest of my school. They're supposed to give me a well-rounded education. I bet that there's even more dishonesty if I go further back through history. So I started to learn about the Cold War, and eventually that led me to World War II. Now, in World War II, my textbooks covered, again, only the American side, very little about the Soviet. There was only about a paragraph of the Eastern Front. They mentioned the battles of Leningrad and Stalingrad, and that was pretty much it. So when I started to learn about, just how many people died in the East in World War II, it was a real eye-opener for me. So I knew that there were about 500,000 casualties for the United States, and that's a lot. But the Soviet Union lost between 28 and 30 million people. And that kind of a sacrifice you can't just forget about, because those men and women did not just fight for their own nation, but for the entire world to remove the threat of fascism.
So let's go to another question. So how do you find out the Soviet army of the World War II period during the Great Patriotic War?
How did I find out?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about the Soviet army in average? I mean, as they were good, or it was like just killing, just throwing a bunch of people on a battle and just trying to conquer something?
Well, it was a desperate situation, and when you have Operation Barbarossa coming into Soviet territory in 1941, there was a lot of confusion, and it was like, oh well, we got to get going here. So it's not a war of aggression, I think. Is that what you're asking me?
Yep.
As much as it was like a very frantic defense for the first few years, and then it's not so much like we want to take over Europe or the entire world, but we need to secure ourselves by removing the greatest threat that mankind has known.
Gotcha. What do you think about World War II?
What do I think about it?
Yep.
It was horrible. I mean, what more can you say? I mean, so many people lost their lives. It's unthinkable. Hundreds of millions of people died, not just in combat, but also in German concentration camps and atrocities committed by the Japanese and also by the Allies too. It was just generally bad for everybody.
So let's go to another one. And how about Russia and the I mean, your thoughts about Russia and United States today, their relationship today and back in the days.
Okay, no, but back in the days, do you mean like Cold War era?
Cold War, taking World War II, all
Well,
that relationship that was going through. Is it more friendship or it's more hate to each other?
right now, I feel like it's hostile, but it's not to the degree that it was in the Cold War. Because you still have a lot of people who remember the animosity between these two nations. And the Cold War only ended, 25 years ago. So it's still within human memory. I mean, I remember it, So people tend not to forget these kinds of things. Once you have it in your mind that somebody is your enemy, they're going to be your enemy until you're dead or they're dead.
All right. So another question comes from my friend, and he's asking how people that knows you, how they react when they find out that you're doing that badass communist thing. Especially you, our commissar, sometimes.
Occasionally, when I have to be. When the party calls, I answer. Well, most people who know me, most people who meet me, learn that I'm a reenactor very quickly. A lot of like what I post on social media, when I do post, are photos of me at reenactments. Now, I'm not one of the people that is constantly posting to Facebook all the time. Like, here's what I ate for breakfast, that kind of thing. When I put something on Facebook, it's something that I consider important. And when I go out to interact with people and do a little bit of education, like the history of what happened here, and to remember all of these men who gave their lives to secure our freedoms. So, what do they think of me? I'm sure some of them think I'm at least a little crazy. But anyone who really gets to know me, though, they're pretty cool with it, and they think it looks neat, and I have a good time.
People must think that you're wealthy enough to get all that uniforms, guns, and stuff like that. You gotta have some money for that.
So, well, you save it up. If you're careful with your money,
Yep.
it goes far.
Yeah. All right. Another one. I don't understand my own handwriting sometimes.
You are the officer. You're supposed to be educated.
Yeah,
You
but
can't read your own
handwriting
writing.
sucks. All right, my last question to you is gonna be like, so today, how average American think about average Russian? I mean, about Russians. How
Well,
they react
I'm-
when they see the Russians.
I'm
what
going.
they think. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are very close to Colonel Zaitsev's thoughts on this. His outlook on the situation is that normal people like you or I, we do not want a conflict. The politicians do, because they're the ones who profit from it. So if you are Russian and I'm an American, and you and I would meet on the street, we would be just respectful of each other, I would assume, and you would not start a fight with them. Certainly not. You have to take people on a person-to-person basis. You can't dehumanize an entire nation of people. So I think that the relationship between the regular people of Russia and the United States would actually be pretty friendly if it weren't for agitators in public office who are like, no, these people are bad, we need to go destroy them.
Yep. All right, Rob. Thank you for your interview.
You're welcome.
Can you just tell a couple of Russian words to the camera?
Like what?
I don't know. Send them to them.
Наше дело правое, мы будем победители.
Наше дело правое,
Наше
победа
дело-
за нами.
Победа за нами.
All right. Thank you again.
You're welcome.